Welcome to That's Gotta Hurt Live. Sorry, I was looking up something on my iPad and got distracted. Very excited to have you here wherever you're watching. Hope you're making tonight your masterpiece. My name's Dr. David Geier, orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, media medical expert. Whether you bet on sports, you play fantasy sports, or you're like me and you're just a die-hard sports fan, I help you understand the injuries of pro and college athletes so that you can hopefully win your sports bets, hopefully win your fantasy competitions, or just have more fun watching the games. As always, please leave comments if you have any comments about what we're going to talk about tonight. LeBron James, James Harden, Terence Davis, Nassir Little. So I thought it was going to be a slow night, and it is kind of, but the injuries are kind of interesting. I am sort of excited about that. So leave your comments. Love to know where you are. If you want to tell me that, just know also that I am not involved in these injuries. I don't have any inside information. I'm just analyzing what's in the media for you so that you can understand a little bit better and make decisions that are best for you. If you do leave questions for or about your injuries, I don't do that a lot on this show, but occasionally I will answer those. Just understand they are not medical advice. Do know, though, that tomorrow at noon Eastern Time in my Better Than Ever Live, I do a Friday show, most Fridays, noon p.m. Eastern Time, where I will answer your injury questions, your personal injuries. Again, it's not medical advice, but I will talk about the injury. I'll talk about treatments for it, surgeries for it, complications of it, long-term prognosis, all that kind of stuff. So if you have that kind of thing, or you know people that have orthopedic injuries, have them go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dr. David Geier. Subscribe, click the bell to be notified when I'm on live, or have them do that and join us there. All right, let's start. Probably the least interesting of the injuries tonight is one of the best players of all time, and that's Lakers star LeBron James. He initially was listed as questionable to play in tonight's game. The Lakers are taking on the 76ers on TNT. I just saw, this is what I was looking at just now on DraftKings, they're saying that LeBron has been ruled out. They're saying it's knee soreness. Now, we don't know of a specific injury. He's been playing lights out. He's played the last 25 games. He's averaging over 30 points a game, shooting over 53% from the field. I mean, just tearing it up with Anthony Davis out almost all of that time. And honestly, the Lakers are a pretty bad team, quite honestly. So when I saw questionable, I was pretty convinced he wasn't going to play. This isn't a Memphis Grizzlies questionable where we've had so many guys out. When they make questionable on the injury report, we're pretty excited because we know they're probably going to play that night. But with LeBron, I was a little more skeptical, largely because of how much he's been playing. Maybe he has a specific injury. My guess is this is wear and tear over a long stretch, being asked to do a whole lot because the team around him without Anthony Davis stinks. He was having to play center. It was just a grind. 25 straight games, no nights off, all that travel. And I know a lot of guys do that, but he's getting up there in age in the league. And all those years of going deep in the playoffs, those are extra playoff seasons when you do the math and add all those games together. So this, to me, is not a surprise. You saw the line move from, and it may be different now, it was the Lakers were plus 2.5 before news of him being out. It's gone up to, at least as I saw it a few minutes ago, it was 5.5. So, and that makes sense. The Lakers, now it's Anthony Davis instead of LeBron. Maybe they do just fine because Anthony Davis will probably take Embiid or try to guard Embiid as well as Embiid's playing. That's a tough matchup for Anthony Davis coming off an injury, but still, it's worth watching. I don't expect this to be a long-term thing from LeBron. We have not gotten any whiff that there's something bad going on, so don't expect it to be anything bad. All right, James Harden missed last night's game. He's the star guard for the Brooklyn Nets, or one of them when Kyrie decides to play, or when he can play on road games, because he can't play in New York because he's not vaccinated, which, it is what it is. I'm over all that stuff. But having said that, James Harden missed last night's game. This is a team already without Kevin Durant for his knee injury. Kyrie can only play road games. Harden was really all they had the last few weeks for a lot of those games. He missed last night's game with a hamstring injury. Now, we talk all the time about hamstring injuries being sort of day-to-day. not something that you expect to be long-term. If it is, they usually tell you that up front. And that is true to a certain extent. Every day you check in with the athletes, see how they're feeling, see how it feels as they go through some motions and things like that. You got to be really careful not to re-injure it and set it all the way back to the beginning. Here's where there may be a concern. It might be more than a day-to-day thing. Remember last year in the playoffs, game 1, he injured his hamstring. Turns out it was a grade 2 hamstring. He ended up playing through that, probably made it a little bit worse, but he was really, really limited. Hamstring injuries, there was a study, it's probably been 7 or 8 years now. There was a study looking at soccer players, I think professional soccer players, but it may have been college football, pro and college football too. I forget the sport. But the authors of that study showed that somebody that's had an athlete who's had a hamstring injury is 6 times more likely to re-injure that hamstring than somebody who hasn't had a hamstring injury. It just is one of those injuries that happens, very frequently. We see this all the time in the NFL. You see it all the time in soccer. I'm a big Liverpool fan. Naby Keita, one of our midfielders, seems to have a hamstring injury all the time, and it's just something that you really have to watch for. That fact is a little hard to overcome, but you sort of go full court press and doing everything you can to get it to heal. Largely, you don't return somebody back before they're ready, but then there's lots of physical therapy and rehab. Sometimes if it's actually a small tear or even a bigger tear, you'll do an injection of a substance like PRP, platelet-rich plasma, which is a procedure where we draw up a little blood, put the bloods in a syringe. We put the syringe in a centrifuge, which spins it really fast for a minute and then 5 minutes, depending on the protocol. Removes the red blood cells, removes the white blood cells. What's left is the plasma, and the plasma has your platelets. You inject that into whatever part of the body, in this case the hamstring. It releases its growth factors to stimulate an inflammatory response and then try to get that muscle to heal. And there is some evidence that speeds the healing of hamstring injuries. This is just one to watch. Hopefully this is just a little, very mild strain, not anything big, but again, with the history, you sort of worry. And I don't actually 100% know. I tried to figure this out earlier, if this is the same leg that he had the hamstring in the playoffs. But again, I would still watch for this one. All right, now this is one that you may not be interested in. Sacramento Kings guard Terence Davis injured his wrist last night, and he has now been ruled out indefinitely. And let me show you why this is interesting. Well, it may not work real well on my hand and wrist model here. When you see an NBA player out for out indefinitely, I thought, oh, surely, like Alex Caruso, he broke it, right? He may have had an injury to the distal radius right there, the end of the long radius bone in your forearm. Turns out he didn't do that. This is really interesting. There were hints earlier in the day that it was a tendon injury, and I was like, what kind of traumatic injury would this potentially be? And then I saw in another report that what he did is he has what's called an ECU injury, or extensor carpi ulnaris injury. Now, you're not going to see the tendons here, but if you sort of look at your wrist, there's tendons that run, you can see them in my hand, but they run across your wrist. They're the tendons that pull your wrists and fingers back like this. The ECU, or the extensor carpi ulnaris, is the one closest to the middle finger. It runs right over, see if I can show you that here, that bony prominence right there. That's called your ulnar styloid. And that tendon is held normally just inside that. That's where your ECU is. I'm trying to get this. Let me do it maybe this side. Well, that's my watch side. It's just on the inside here. That's held in place with a sheath of tissue. The problem is when you land on it or get your wrist jerked suddenly, that sheath of tissue can tear, and then all of a sudden that tendon can snap back and forth across that ulnar styloid, that ulna right there, that bony prominence. And it drives people crazy because they turn their wrist and it just pops back and forth. But 2, if you let it do that very long, the bone is gradually going to fray that tendon and it's going to rupture. So that is something that typically is fixed with surgery. Now, you don't do necessarily anything to the tendon. You just reattach that tendon sheath to hold it in place, and then you've got to protect the wrist while that tendon sheath heals. Typically, that process is about 6 weeks, but then you got to get motion back and strength back. So this could be anywhere from 6 weeks maybe to 12 weeks, and look looking at the timeline of the season, and depending on where the Kings are toward the end of the season, are they around play-in game level? Maybe they bring him back. But really, not an injury you see that much in the NBA, but it's actually something you see in just kind of everyday people sometimes that suffer a traumatic wrist injury. All right, and then we're going to finish up talking about Nassir Little, the Portland Trailblazers forward. And this is a team that has been riddled with injuries. We've talked a lot about Damian Lillard and his lower abdominal tendinopathy and the surgery he had with Dr. William Myers in Philadelphia. We briefly have talked about C.J. McCollum and his collapsed lung. He's now back. Now we've got one of the players that's been playing better since McCollum and Lillard's been out, and that's Nassir Little, along with Anthony Simons. Little was caught up got his arm tangled against Karl Anthony Towns last night of the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you've seen him, he is huge. That's not really surprising. Apparently, he told people afterwards, told the media, it was nothing. He was just being a drama queen. Well, it turns out it was a little more than just being a drama queen. Had an MRI today that shows that he has a labral tear. So this one you might know a little bit more about, but I'll show you this one too. You'd think I'd have these ready because I know what I'm going to talk about, but sorry about that. All right, so the labrum, it doesn't really show very well on here, but so the shoulder is a ball and socket joint. And if I could pull these muscles away, you can kind of see in there, try to see, deep in there, there's a cartilage bumper along the socket. So if you can imagine the socket of the shoulder, the ball of socket, as a golf tee, okay? The socket is actually not concave like the top of a golf tee. It's actually flat. What makes it concave is the cartilage bumper around that socket. It's called the glenoid. And what I suspect he did when he got his arm jerked is it pulled part of that labrum off of the socket, off of the glenoid, either toward the front down here or maybe toward up at the top. But if he detached it, you probably can't play through that. You probably need to go through a surgery, arthroscopic surgery, to go in and reattach it. If it was just frayed, just a little fraying of the labrum, you very often could try to play through it and do something at the end of the season, maybe where you just go and smooth it out. But the fact that they're saying he's probably out for the season makes me think that he needs surgery and it needs to be reattached. Now, that's a big surgery. I used to love that surgery. That was one of my favorites, maybe my favorite surgery that I loved performing on athletes. Usually for shoulder dislocations is where you do that. But having said that, the prognosis for that is good long term. It's not a high risk of re-injury, but it does take time to recover, somewhere 4 to 6 months recovery, maybe a little bit quicker in a sport where you're not tackling people or getting tackled, unless you're playing against Karl Anthony Towns. But having said that, should be something that he gets back to 100%. And he was really having a breakout season. He sort of, from a distance, I don't really follow the Trailblazers closely, but sort of struggled, but now seems to be coming into his own. All right, that is all I've got for you tonight. I thought it was going to be a really short show, and then some of the injuries kind of turned interesting. Again, tomorrow at noon p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be on Ask Dr. Geier Live, youtube.com/Dr. David Geier, and ring the bell after you subscribe. Ring the bell to be notified when I'm on live, but bring your questions. I don't routinely answer a lot of orthopedic questions that people have. You notice, if you leave those in the comments to my videos, I don't do it there because I get hundreds of those a week, and there's just no way to keep up. So if you want to come and do it live, I'd love to have you. I try to do it most Fridays, but I will not be there the following Friday. So if you have one that you want to answer or want to ask kind of soon, do that coming up. Also, Better Than Ever Live next week, we're going to talk exosomes, sort of the latest and greatest things past stem cells for arthritis potentially, and we're going to talk about the keto diet and athletic performance. We've heard a number of athletes that have gone keto and say it really helped their careers. We'll talk about that next week as well. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great night watching NBA games or whatever it is you're going to be doing, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. Take care.